let's come to your area of expertise. Now, you've been in charge of the South Asia work center at the Wilson Center since 2007, which is more than 15 years. Now, I'm of the Indian origin, and I have lived in Australia for almost 30 years. Um, Even now, I find it hard to fully understand the Western psyche. In my opinion, the gap between the Eastern and the Western cultures is too big for anyone to fully understand, let alone be in a position to speak authoritatively about it. What has been your experience, and how sure you are about your understanding of South Asia?
I think it's important that we be very humble about our expertise and level of knowledge. Indeed, I've been studying and researching, reading, writing on South Asia since 2007, when I assumed the South Asia portfolio at the Wilson Center. But I think it's important for people like me who are not of the region, from the region, we should be careful about how we describe ourselves. I don't consider myself an expert. I consider myself a specialist. But I'm not from the region. I've never lived in the region for an extended period of time. So I think that it's important to stay humble and really to think of it's better to think of ourselves as students, as eternal students of the region that we study. I think that one could argue that if you have a PhD and 40 years of experience and you've lived in the region or country of your expertise for many years, that may be a bit different. But I think that for someone from the West, and especially someone from the West who is studying South Asia, this is an incredibly complex part of the world. I guess the whole world is complex these days. But I would argue, because of the history, and because of the demographics and so many other aspects of South Asia, it's an incredibly complex sense to make sense of. And I would think that many South Asians, many Indians would have that challenge as well. I don't profess to be an expert in my own country because we're always learning. So I think as long as we're humble, things will
Sure.
work out just fine.
Okay, let me give you a specific example to further explain my previous question. You may have seen the joyful scenes across India during the consecration temple in Ayodhya. Even Indians living abroad joined the celebrations. Now, in Western media, the coverage often focused on the Hindu nationalist government of Modi and its connection to the destruction of a 500-year-old mosque, framing the temple construction as further marginalizing and frightening the Muslim minority. Now, consider an average Indian who grew up with deeply ingrained religious values from stories like Ramayana and Mahabharata, which have shaped Indian culture for thousands of years. Now, for this person, finding mosques built on land considered sacred to Lord Ram in Ayodhya or Lord Krishna in Mathura, or encountering defaced idols in temples all across the country, brings immense grief and anger that has accumulated over the centuries. So today, their happiness at seeing Lord Ram return home after 500 years is profound. So, as someone who is of Western origin and perhaps secular, it may be hard for you to fully grasp the depth of this individual's emotions. So, the Western media's portrayal often overlooks this perspective, focusing solely on the destruction of the mosque by Hindu mobs without recognizing the historical and cultural context. So, is this simply hypocrisy, ignorance, or arrogant presumption of understanding by the Western media?
Well, I think that whenever it comes to mass media coverage of an issue as complex and sensitive as the example that you've given, there's always going to be a level of reductiveness. This is just the way it is. I mean, if you look at, there's so many examples around the world, far beyond India, where you have um, these very complex examples of disputes, disagreements over different layers of religious politics and the like. I mean, if you go to the Middle East and see how things have played out there on many levels over the years, It's incredibly complex. And whenever we're talking about religion, that is inherently sensitive. And especially when it comes to someone on the outside who may not be a member of the religious group that's the focus of the example, it's even more difficult. So to your question, I don't have a good answer, quite frankly. I think that, if we want to be very simplistic about this, we could argue that, well, 1992 happened much more recently than what happened 500, 600 years ago. So maybe, there's a tendency to focus on what's more recent because it somehow seems more familiar and more vivid. That's not an acceptable answer for sure. And I agree with you that it is important when looking at the story surrounding the recent consecration of this temple. It's very important to look back at the history far beyond 1992 and to go back. That is critical. And indeed, you're right. To be fair, I think that some Western media outlets did provide more comprehensive, more balanced coverage that gave the full picture, but some did not. And, I don't have a good answer for that other than to say that, sometimes the more recent events are those that are more easy to depict and to draw on. Again, it's not a good answer. It's not an acceptable answer, but I'll leave you with that.
I'm not questioning the imperfections or otherwise of their democracy or their principles or lack of it. I'm questioning their understanding of our history. Okay? If you hear the comments from many parts of the world, so if you take a problem, remove all the historical context from it, sanitize it and make it into a political correctness argument and say, oh, I have principles and don't you have principles? I have principles too. And one of my principles is obligation to people who were let down at the time of partition.